poppy, despite what some people think is not kind of a newfangled peacenik idea, it actually originated in Great Britain in the 1930s, not long after the red poppy, and it emerged out of the concerns of people, particularly women, many of whom had lost husbands, sons, fathers in the Great War, who saw in the 1930s a rising, growing militarism, and they could see that it seemed that the lesson from the Great War had really not been learned, and that we were moving in the direction of possibly another war, which was the case. So they came up with the white poppy as they put it, as a pledge to peace that war must not happen again. So that was the original focus of the white poppy, and it was enormously successful at the time. In the early 30s, there was really very strong support. People really very much remembered the horrors of World War I, and so it really was quite popular, and it continued to be distributed in Britain for many years after that, and then after the Second World War, I think, also had some resurgence, but it kind of gradually declined over the years. And then in, I think, the 90s or 80s, there was a kind of, again, a real upsurge of interest. So here you'll see 1938 Women's Cooperative Guild members with a white poppy wreath and wearing white poppies. So that's and right now the white poppy in Britain is seeing a great increase every year. It's still, as here, minuscule compared with the red poppy, but the interest is steadily growing every year. They report more and more. I think last year, I think they distributed maybe 50,000 white poppies in Britain. So Denis and I first met the white poppy probably about 15 years ago through the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, who had a table with some handmade poppies. And we just really liked the idea of the white poppy, so we started wearing them at Remembrance Day. And what we found was that people asked about them. People on the bus, people on the street would say, oh, what's the white poppy? What does it mean? What's it for? So we thought, gee, this is a really good way of getting people talking and thinking about issues of remembrance, what we remember and why. So we looked into the possibility of making them more available. We found out that we could purchase them from the Peace Pledge Union in Britain that makes them. And so about 8 years ago, we started with the first year 50 handmade poppies and then 500 poppies imported from Britain. 8 years later, the last 2 years, we've distributed somewhere over 4,000 poppies across Canada. We're a very small organization. We're not a registered not-for-profit or anything. It's very much a dining room table operation. We have a few friends who volunteer to help with attaching pins to poppies and distributing them at farmers market and that. But other than that, right now we do all the packaging and everything. We have a website which has information about 5 years ago, I think, we launched our first school campaign because we had received queries from schools about using poppies. So we now we offer subsidized poppies to elementary and secondary schools. We have a resource package for teachers at both elementary and secondary level with materials, suggestions for activities that the students might undertake. Because one of the interesting things is that the Remembrance Day Assembly is the one single required school assembly in BC schools, the only one. Every school has to have a Remembrance Day Assembly. So there's a real interest in teachers in being able to bring forward a more nuanced perspective and different ways of looking at Remembrance Day. So we found that there's a lot of interest in using white poppies in the schools. And so that's, so one of the things that we did probably about 6 years back is we, one of the things I found really remarkable was the statistics about the change in civilian versus military deaths. So this represents the ratio of civilian white poppy and red military deaths in World War I. So it was about 30%, even at that time, civilian deaths. And this is contemporary wars. 90% of the victims of contemporary wars are civilians. War has gotten a lot safer for combatants, but at the same time, it's gotten much less safe for civilians. So I thought this was a really important way to focus why we need to broaden Remembrance Day, why we really need to be remembering all the victims and all the consequences of war and not focusing on the dwindling military component. So we had the kids at a local school made those white cardboard poppies and colored them all for us. And then we put together the 2 wreaths. And another reason I wanted to do that was I thought that as kind of a PR thing, things that kids have put their heart into is kind of harder for the military vet establishment to kind of oppose. So that's another pragmatic reason. This is the card we produced for, most of you have copies of our original info card that we give out with each poppy. This is a version that we came up with that's suitable for older children, older elementary school children, with the same information but just worded a little bit differently. The other thing that's really struck me is that after all these years, how little we've really learned. That the deaths and the wars that are continuing are so shocking that after all these almost 100 years of getting together and remembering, like, what have we really achieved? You look at the bombing in the upper pictures and the lower pictures, and you think, haven't we learned anything? Again, look at those 2 boat pictures, 1919 and today. I mean, it could be the same picture colored. It's just shocking. 65 million refugees or displaced people in 2016. I mean, shocking. Women, again, you know, pictures from World War II and contemporary pictures, Bosnia, Nigeria, just over and over, you know, the issue of what have we learned and what are we accomplishing by remembering if all we're doing is getting together once a year and remembering. Child soldiers is another issue that, again, resonates with people. These are ways that we have to be pragmatic as to what issues we can use to bring people in. And child soldiers is a significant concern. It's something people have heard about, and it's, again, a way to make people think about broadening Remembrance Day to include more than just Canadian military victims. Targeting of medical and aid workers is, again, something that people have heard of, but when you actually see the devastation of a bombed hospital, ambulances, the areas of the world, the red is attacks on medical facilities and transport like ambulances, blue is attack on personnel, striped is both. The black circle in Turkey and Libya are countries where there's restrictions on who can receive medical care. So again, we really need to emphasize these aspects. Children, people are more aware with the refugee situation of to what a great extent children are victimized by war. And so that's some of the focuses. So as the card says, you know, it's like 85 years later, the world's seen, you know, over 300 wars and the deaths of over 200 million people. we really need to be doing more. So we run the White Poppy campaign every year. We do mail order across Canada. But for a couple of years now, I've been kind of feeling that it would be really good to do something on Remembrance Day, because really, on the day itself in Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, where we live, there really wasn't anything that offered people a way to kind of publicly show a broader, more nuanced reflection of what, of their feelings about war and remembrance. And so we decided last year that we would try to have a wreath-laying ceremony to remember the overlooked victims of war. And I consciously didn't want to use the word forgotten, although it's the first one that comes to mind, because really, for the people who were affected by it, those people, they may be forgotten by the media, but they're not forgotten by their societies and communities and families. So that's why I chose the term overlooked rather than forgotten. So we applied made some phone calls to try to apply to get a permit. The first place we were told no, they didn't want to do it there. And we kind of got the runaround, and I think if I'd sort of said, oh, you know, they're going to block us and given up, that would have been it. But by this point, I'd sort of thought, no, there's no reason that this shouldn't happen. The things we were careful in choosing, and we've always been careful in running the White Poppy campaign, is to say that the white poppy is not in conflict with the red poppy. It's not an either-or choice to remember the military or the civilian victims of war, that it does no injustice to combatants to insist that we count the full costs of war. So we chose a time, the afternoon of November 11th rather than the morning, enough time that if people wanted to go to the first ceremony and then come to ours, they would be able to do it, and a location that was not the cenotaph, so that we didn't build up any resistance that way. And eventually we got through to a supportive person in the events department. I was able to hold a meeting with them. They were very positive, forwarded our request to the right people in the Parks Board, and we were given permission to use the Peace Park at the end of the Burrard Street Bridge, which was our alternate location, where all the peace marches in the 70s started from, and where there is, in fact, an eternal flame, and it's actually an official peace park. So we got permission to use that site, and we started our preparations. And one of the things that I was interested in was thinking about, well, what different groups should we have wreaths to commemorate? And the goal with these wreaths, which were what we call the universal wreaths, was that they would represent not individual conflicts, but groups of victims that appear over and over again in different conflicts. And we produced a series of wreaths, again with strips across them saying who the wreath was for. So we had a wreath for refugees, for the lost potential of 50 million children whose education is disrupted by war, a shocking situation and a great loss of potential for the world. This is just some views. This was a Syrian family who agreed at the last minute. It took a lot of connecting through the communities to try to get somebody. So what we had, the wreath ceremonies kind of was in two parts. We had the first section, so we had live music. I gave a short talk. Our partner sponsors, which was the BC Humanist Association, gave a short address, and then we had the laying of these, what I call the universal wreaths. And so there was 10 universal wreaths. And then we had a section following that where groups could lay wreaths commemorating a particular conflict. So this was our first year. We only had 3 wreaths in that group, but that's an area that I think there is potential for. So what I tried to do for laying the wreaths was I tried to contact people from different communities to ask if they would participate in laying the wreath. Because we knew we were going to be very tight for time, we were doing it in the afternoon of November the 11th. It gets dark, you don't know what the weather's going to be like, it could be pouring rain, people are not going to want to stand around for 2.5 hours. So there wasn't really the potential for having groups speak, but I wanted to have some of those groups at least represented. So we had someone from the Mennonite Central Committee laid the wreath for war resistors and conscientious objectors. We had
Teresa,
women...
That's in the video, I could put it
Yeah.
on the video.
but it doesn't say who's laying the wreath. Or does it?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, wave from Women Against Violence Against Women laying that wreath. We had children from a local school make the hands for this wreath here, and the poppies, and 2 kids from the school came and laid that wreath.